Greetings, everyone. Former President Thabo Mbeki is raising interesting issues on the question of migration. He begins by saying that South Africa must implement its immigration laws. But he then raises two critical issues that we want to speak about in this platform. Firstly, he says that the attacks directed at migrants in 2008, which were known as xenophobic attacks, were instigated, in his own words, by people that wanted to force Zimbabweans to go back to Zimbabwe to vote out ZANU-PF from power, specifically former President, the late Robert Mugabe. President Mbeki says he had access to an intelligence report where in that report it was mentioned the venues where people were meeting, names of people and times in which they were meeting, plotting on how to uproot Zimbabweans, so to speak, to go and vote out President Robert Mugabe at the time. This is an interesting issue because if one then looks into it, which we've been saying in this platform, that South Africans in general, they are not anti-migrants. That is the majority of them. But of course, you do have those that are anti-migrants. But in general, South Africans in the majority, they are not anti-migrants. And the former President Mbeki speaks about the contribution by ordinary people across the African continent when they were raising resources. We've spoken in this platform on how some ex-Zipra cadres who had left the Zimbabwean army were working as civil servants in Zimbabwe would, after hours, assist in a moving military hardware across Limpopo River so that Umkhonto weSizwe would wage a strike inside South Africa. All this was part of a collective effort. Now, the attacks in 2008, if one listens to what President Mbeki says, is that it was instigated by some third force elements. Third force elements who wanted to see Mugabe losing power. And I want to underline this. That some of us, we stood opposed to Robert Mugabe and his party because we understand that his party was a project of imperialist forces as it split from ZAP in 1963. It's important to mention this. Then there was a fallout with the imperialist forces when Mugabe assisted the Democratic Republic of Congo in defending President Laurent Kabila against the stooges of imperialist Rwanda and Uganda, who were used as proxies. It's important to underline this. That when there was a fallout with the imperialists, because ZANU is established in 1963 as a project of imperialist forces. Then in 1997, when the Labour Party came into power, and Mugabe sent the military in the Democratic Republic, Republic of Congo in 1998, there was a fallout. And the imperialist forces mobilized to ensure that Mugabe loses elections. So President Mbeki then brings this interesting discussion. Because we should not just see ZANU as victims of imperialist forces. We should acknowledge that through Capricorn society, they were established by the imperialist forces to curtail the influence of the Soviet Union in the rest of the continent, because the Soviet Union was in support of ZAPU, ANC, SWAPO, and others, authentic liberation movements. Then the question that should be posed now is who is behind these anti-Zimbabwean sentiments in South Africa? Are those forces that President Mbeki speaks about still very active, which would want to see Zimbabweans leaving South Africa? It's a debate that we must have. But the second important thing that the President Mbeki raises is that you cannot continue to define South Africa in the manner in which you used to, say, 1980 or 1985. And we have spoken about this in this platform when we're discussing the national question, the component of belonging. Because we cannot continue to define South Africans along traditional ethnic lines in South Africa to say you must be Venda, Zulu, Ndebele, Xhosa, and so forth. Because we have other people from the rest of the continent who now live in South Africa. And how do you deal with such individuals? Some of them are now South African citizens. Some of them have spent over 30 years, 3 decades or more in South Africa. But still, they are considered not welcome in South Africa. And President Mbeki speaks about the deportation of people to Mozambique, deportation to Zimbabwe. When the truck deporting them is back in South Africa, the same people that have been deported, they will be back in South Africa. So the question really is, how then do you deal with this question? To an extent, the African National Congress, at its policy conference in 2002 and in its elective conference, while we do not agree with some of the issues that they then raised, but there was an important point that they raised, which said you have people who are stateless who live along the borderlines. And these people are under the authority of the South African traditional leadership. But because the South African traditional leadership, while they can make land available to such people who found themselves being pushed to the other side, but they are now back under the authority of these chiefs, those people remain without proper documents. Because the traditional leaders cannot issue anyone with a document. They can give anyone land because it is under them, but they cannot. So it's another important point that the ANC in particular did discuss. We saw the assistance that was then rendered to the people of Mozambican origin, about 3,000 of them, just before elections, who were then assisted. We had, soon after independence in Mozambique, they crossed to South Africa and they remained there. So the question, as we conclude, if we listen carefully to what President Mbeki is saying, is that in this national dialogue that President Mbeki speaks to, is that the issue of migration, it's an issue which cannot just be resolved by bundling people in a truck and deporting them. It needs a new thinking on how do you approach the question of migration to ensure that the communities are safe, to ensure that at least everyone who's in the Republic is accounted for. Because we have said also in this platform that it is dangerous to have people in a country that are not known because they are not documented. So the attitude of saying, let's just bundle everyone into a train, into a police van, deport them. For the last 30 years, it has not worked. So, in this national dialogue that President Mbeki speaks about, there must be a rethink on how do you deal with the issue of migration in South Africa, particularly when you are dealing with people that have been in South Africa for more than 30 years. I was talking to other comrades that came to South Africa in 1992. They're about to reach their retirement age. They have kids that are born to South Africa. And the attitude being, no, even those born in South Africa, they must be bundled back. They've never been to Zimbabwe, most of them. What do you think about what President Mbeki says? Of course, we agree with him to the extent that there must be a rethink on the question of migration, how migration is handled. Because, as he correctly says, it would be wrong to say the economic decline in South Africa is as a result of poor people that are working on the farms, are working as domestic workers, are working in the construction industry, who are being exploited, right, by their bosses. And then you attribute economic decline to them. Please share your views, write in the comment section, like this video, subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you're on TikTok, please do follow us. Otherwise, Amandla, comrades.